Okay, so again, welcome. We do these webinars every month on the third Wednesday of the month. Today, we're going to go through some quick announcements, talk about the next couple of presentations. We'll have our presentation and discussion by Anne, and then we'll wrap up with any questions. I'll stop the recording, and then we'll have our general discussion. We will probably integrate some general discussion questions at the end of each of these webinars moving forward, so we can use this as an opportunity to talk with and learn from one another. So if anyone has any questions that you'd like to pose to the group or discussion items, you're welcome to email those to me, and I can send those out with the reminders to kind of prompt people as to what we're going to be talking about. So our upcoming presentations on October 16th, we have Charlotte Glenn, who is the State Master Gardener Coordinator in North Carolina. And Charlotte is going to talk about what does it take to lead Extension Master Gardener volunteers. So Charlotte has done a lot of work with her theses and dissertation on core competencies of Master Gardener coordinators. So this relates to all of us, whether you're new or you've been on the job for a while. She worked with her volunteers and worked with her coordinators throughout the state and has identified the core competencies that could help us succeed in our job. So she will be reporting on what she found as part of her research, and she'll also be reporting on some of the things that maybe we can address in these webinars. And if we find some competencies that we think would be helpful to us, then we can work on getting speakers to speak to those specific skills and then work on that for next year's webinars in 2020. And then on November 20th, we have Natalie Bumgardner, who is the on the National Extension Master Gardener Coordinator Committee. She's also the Residential Horticulture Extension Specialist at the University of Tennessee. They'll be hosting the National Extension Master Gardener Coordinator Conference in next year. But Natalie will give us an update on the overall National Committee for Extension Master Gardener Coordinators, the strategic plan, and then where we're going with our professional development goals. One thing that we found out this year when we did our Extension Volunteer Conference in Montana was that for Master Gardener coordinators, there are some different things that we could use to help us with professional development, such as volunteer retention, conflict resolution, how do you dismiss a volunteer, things like that. And so she's going to talk about where we are with our professional development goals and then moving into planning for our monthly webinars next year. So I really encourage you to attend those upcoming webinars. They'll both be great, and they'll also sort of set the tone for where we're going to go next year in 2020. And again, if you all have any suggestions or ideas for monthly webinar topics, or you yourself are doing great work and you want to share it with your peers, send me an email and then we'll go ahead and get you set up and scheduled for next year. So we'll go into the chat box, and if you could take a moment to let us know what state you're from. All right, we've got Colorado with an exclamation point. And Virginia, Maryland, Oregon, Florida, California, Idaho, Illinois, Indiana, Oregon, Washington, North Carolina, Connecticut. Great, we're so happy that everyone is on the call today. I'm excited about this presentation for a lot of reasons, and it's because personally, I know Anne, she's a friend of mine here in Florida, but Anne and I share a lot of the same, we like some of the same podcasts we like to run. We're both addicted to anything that can help us with time management. And so I'm really happy that Anne will present some of her tips and tricks and life hacks to help us be more successful in our role. So Anne, go ahead and take it away. Oh, real quick, I did want to say, you're all muted, but you're welcome to unmute your phone and call in or talk on the discussion, and you can also use the chat box if you want to add. So go ahead and engage if you feel like you want to contribute. Okay, Anne, thank you so much for being here.
All right, great. Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. I really appreciate everybody tuning into this. As Nicole said, this is something I'm really interested in, and at some point I had to stop my PowerPoint because I listened to more and more podcasts and get more of my ideas, and just gets longer and longer, I guess. So I am an avid podcast listener, and I realized that as I was listening to some of my favorite podcasts, I was just getting a lot of ideas that I was using in my everyday life. And the small tips and organizational skills I was getting from these podcasters and the professionals that were on there were really helping me manage my time and do some planning and things. And so I hope you're able to take, one or two things away at least from some of the things that I have learned. And before we get started, let's do a really quick poll again. If you listen to podcasts, type yes or no in the chat box, just to see if that's a medium that people are into. And if you do, you can type the name of the podcast into the chat box that you enjoy listening to, or you can unmute as well and share that via phone. And I'll provide a list at the end of some of the ones that I have been listening to. It seems like the ones I find, there's links to new ones all the time. Great, thanks for sharing. All right. So today we're going to talk about some of the time management tools and planning basics and other kind of life hack type things I've picked up from listening to some of my favorite podcasts. And I'm clearly sharing things that have worked well for me and sharing how I've implemented them. But I mean, none of these tools will work for everybody. And again, I hope you find at least a couple things that you can take away from today's podcast or webinar. Okay, I'm sorry, this is a little lagging on the slide advance, but all right, there we go. Okay, so I know what you're thinking. I don't have time to listen to a podcast. I don't have time to do another thing at all. Well, one of my favorite podcasters, Laura Vanderkam, who does a lot of time management studies, points out that you have 168 hours in a week. So if you subtract about 10 hours a day for work or commuting as well, 5 days a week, and 8 hours a day for sleeping, 7 days a week, you have a whole extra 62 hours for doing other things like listening to podcasts. So there's always time to fit it in. Just to give you some background on me, I'm pretty organized in general. I'm an upholder as categorized by Gretchen Rubin in the 4 tendencies, which means I meet both inner and outer expectations. So goals and things I set for myself, as well as things that are set by other people, I tend to do those. If you haven't taken that quiz, I think you might enjoy it. It really has given me a lot of insight into the way other people do things as well. And if you just Google the Gretchen Rubin 4 tendencies quiz, you should go right to it. But I mean, I have a lot going on like you, and things that distract me from real work all the time. And really the only way I can keep myself sane is to plan and stay organized. And I've been using paper planners for years and also utilize online calendars. And I'll talk about how I use both of those things. So I've learned a lot of organizational skills from podcasts, and some of the planning and prioritizing things have been some of the most helpful. Friday afternoons are a really great time to set aside a few minutes to plan for the next work week. It's easy to slack off on Friday. You know, you're about ready to go for the weekend if you don't have anything going on Saturday. And instead of it being one of the most unproductive times during the week, you might be able to make it more productive and start a plan for the next week, as well as securing some plans for the weekend as well. Another plus that I have found for doing this on a Friday afternoon is that I don't have to try and do it on Sunday before I go back to work on Monday. I seem to have a lot of things that pile up on Sunday night that I'm preparing for Monday morning, and not having that extra thing to add on is really helpful to me. In addition to the weekly wrap-up that I do on Friday, I do a quick plan for the following week. I block time as needed and schedule items that I take from my online calendar and put that into my paper planner. And I try to plan things before they happen. That doesn't always work, but if I take a few minutes on Friday to check my schedule for the following week, add items as needed, figure out, goals and objectives I have for that week, I can kind of set myself up for success instead of going in kind of blank on Monday morning, not really know what's going to be headed my way. So as far as what I do, I use both a paper planner and online calendar. We use Microsoft Outlook at our office, and it's shared throughout the office. I also have a synced calendar app that I share with my husband for personal calendar items, and they both sync right to my phone. And they're color coordinated and categorized, so I can visually separate them pretty easily if I'm glancing at my phone. But for me, I really like having a paper planner because I have items I like to track monthly, weekly, daily, even annually, and I have some tips on that in the end. And it's all right in front of me, laid out where I can see very easily. But I do like the online calendar for long range scheduling and then sharing things with other people because they're not seeing my paper planner, obviously. In the photo here, you can see my paper planner where I set my daily priority. And this is just the one thing I want to accomplish that day. Could be really simple or a larger task I need to complete. There's no, criteria I set on that at all. But if I can get that one thing done and cross that off, I will feel like I've had a successful day. When I organize my planner for the week ahead, I also add any daily reminders. A ritual and daily reminder can lead to habit change, and it helps me write down the things I want to make into a habit that I just can't seem to get myself to remember. You can see here I have open client log because I have a hard time remembering to log any of the emails and phone calls and walk-in visits that we get in the office. So if I simply remind myself every day to open that Excel spreadsheet, I'm ready to go and it's there if a call comes in. I do something really similar for tracking drinking water and taking vitamins and things like that. Anybody have any Monday morning rituals or daily rituals that they have that they remind themselves of? If you have one to share, you can type it in the chat box or unmute your phone. Might get some good ideas from some other people as well.
And this is Nicole. I tend to not schedule anything on Monday mornings just so I have that time to get in the mindset of the work week. And I also will come in on Mondays and I've just found myself like not immediately turning on my computer and reacting to email. I just sort of spend that time thinking about what do we need to accomplish this week and giving myself that kind of quiet time before we dive in. So that's what I do on Monday mornings.
Yeah, I try not to schedule. In fact, I have a block that you'll see when I show you on the next slide. I actually have a block where I've scheduled time on Monday, particularly where nothing is there, unless something comes up that I really feel like has to be done on Monday. So I like to schedule time blocks. And if you feel like a to-do list is just way too much to keep track of, it's dragging you down, it's never ending, you're never crossing anything off, you can toss the to-do list. I know there's podcasters that say to-do lists are great, and some say never use a to-do list, but this is why we're just sharing tips and tricks that work for each other. So I schedule in time blocks if I need to find time to work on something. And if you're sharing an online calendar, this works great because other people will see that you're scheduled at that time. If they see you're unscheduled, that's when people start to schedule meetings because they see you're free. So even if there's no specific meeting or anything involved, if you like to have a block of time to prepare for the week or whatever it might be, block your time on your calendars to do that. And I do it both in my paper planner and my online calendar as well. I also block the time on Friday afternoons for the weekly wrap up I talked about. So it doesn't usually take too much time, but if it's there, sending me a reminder, it's in my planner, it's on my online calendar, sending me an alert. If there are things I didn't get done during the week, I don't feel bad about them. I just add it to my list and say, I'm going to fit this in next week somehow. If you feel like it was a week that you got a lot of things done or you have a lot of cool things that happen, you can make yourself a little ta-da list and say, look what an awesome job I did this week, and here's a list of what I accomplished. And you can almost use this and look back at it later to kind of see some of the things that you did throughout the year. I find that in addition to setting a daily priority, it helps me think of one big priority that I have to do in each of these three categories. that I have a full week to accomplish. And I'll show you how I do that. In my planner, I just have a top 3. You can see here, W is work, R is relationships. So it could be family, friends, whatever. And then something for myself as well. So these are just kind of the 3 top goals of things I want to accomplish during the week in those categories. And again, could be really small or really big, depending on what you want to get done. So there's also a lot of talk about achieving work-life balance, but I think for people in an extension career, that balance is not the right word, maybe. I like to think that maybe with proper planning and time management, I can achieve happy work-life integration or harmony. And if I think about my calendar, you know, sometimes weeks are filled with lots of work-related things, and other times I have a lot of family things going on, and it never completely balances out. But that harmony is there, that integration is there, and I realize that that's something that's naturally going to happen. Another important part of having a good work-life harmony is to make time for yourself as you plan. So when you're filling out time blocks or marking things down in a paper planner, how can you make time for yourself? You can schedule time for yourself first, whether it's a vacation or workout, time to read, add it to your calendar and you can fill time around it. And I make sure that if I have certain exercise or things I need to do, if I'm planning to run a race or something, that time goes into my calendar before other things do.
And in the chat box, there's a comment from William.
Okay.
If you want, I can read it. I don't know if you can see it on your end.
Yeah, I don't think I can read the whole whole thing. For some reason.
He says he was offering sort of a tip back to what you were talking about. And he said, in the field, as we say, Mondays are unpredictable as to the walk-ins and call-ins. So it is difficult to be in control, but just try to serve the clients at the same time. Prioritize what you really need to get done. Mondays are the worst day for planning. And he puts planning in quotes.
Yeah, and I think that could help with leaving it blank. I mean, if you're scheduling Mondays full of meetings and, specific things hourly, and that they're unpredictable and lots of things happen that you need to corral, then maybe you kind of learn to block off, Monday 8 to noon for realizing that walk-ins and calls can happen, but you don't have anything scheduled and you can kind of roll with it that way, maybe. It's a good idea. So now I just have some tips and tricks and hacks to share, and this is kind of a list that just continues to grow every time I listen to a new podcast, so it's kind of fun. This one, don't collect and neglect. So if you have a lot of items bogging you down, paper items mostly, think about it. Do you really need those old flyers from a conference you went to, or old pamphlets you're going to refer to one day? Think about those items that you're collecting. I've even stopped taking notes on paper at meetings. I don't really tend to accept paper anywhere. I use an app like Evernote for notes. When I'm in a meeting, I can much more easily refer to past meetings that way as well. You could even type in the notes section of your calendar app, really. So I try not to bring any extra paper in. What about a mantra? Do you have a mantra that helps you feel productive? Outer order, inner calm is one from Gretchen Rubin, and I tend to have a lot of her quotes through here, so she's clearly one of my favorites, but it definitely speaks to the way that I work and live. I work best when my space is orderly, and I have been known to procrastinate before I sit down to do something because I just can't get my mind to be present until I have a neat and tidy space. So if you have a favorite mantra or quote that helps you feel productive, you can share that either in the chat box or unmute your phone for that one as well. Sorry, it's lagging again. Yeah, I love the word procrastinate. Well, probably because I do it all the time. Okay, there we go. Schedule a makeup day. This is one of my favorite hacks, really easy. Block a day, at least 1 or 2 a month with nothing on it. It's a bonus if you don't put anything on it. That's a day you can move meetings or something to. And if you don't need to use it, you have a free unscheduled day. A way to make more space in your calendar is to delegate tasks. And as Master Gardener coordinators, you have a group of people willing to help you work towards a successful program. And if you can ask for help and delegate tasks, that will really help you out, but be willing to let the volunteer do the job, even though it might not be exactly how you would do it. If you want to relieve yourself of some of your workload and are lucky enough to have people help you, learn to delegate and be comfortable accepting the way that others will do that job.
And this reminds me of the statement, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. And so,
I have that in here somewhere.
Okay. So a lot of times I think our tendency might be to package everything perfectly before we send it off to somebody. Really, that's not necessary. Sometimes a draft is good. Sometimes, like letting a volunteer help with it or create it is perfectly acceptable. So that's something that I've really tried to work on the past couple of years. So I'm glad you put that in there.
Yeah, and this slide is kind of an example of a situation. So this is our annual banquet and graduation, and I certainly could have planned and run the whole thing myself, but I did not. I did not do a thing, and it was lovely. And it wasn't done exactly how I would have done it, and I probably made some mental notes in my head about that, but hey, I delegated the entire event to a group of Master Gardener volunteers. I got to sit down and enjoy the event. I didn't have to do really any of the speaking or anything at all. It was great. It was definitely worth delegating that task. When you need help with something, you need to remember to ask. People are busy and they don't know when other people need help. You think that they might automatically know, but they don't. There's something called the illusion of transparency, and that's a tendency for people to overestimate the degree to which their personal mental state is known by others. So if you've ever been doing something and thought, why won't someone help me with this? Can't they see I need help? I have been known to do that in front of my husband many times, but they don't notice it. So you have to be really clear. Additionally, you might see something called a diffusion of responsibility. So you're sending out emails and not getting a response and wondering why people won't help you. But with the diffusion of responsibility, it means that the more people that can help you, the less that actually will. So if you think about sending the email to Master Gardener volunteers, they might be thinking, oh, well, she sent this to all of us, so I'm sure someone else is helping. So it's much less effective than phone or face-to-face ask of somebody. It's a lot easier to do, but it's also a lot easier for that person to say no as well. So try to do the phone or face-to-face if you can and you need help. Finally, when asking for help, particularly from Master Gardener volunteers or interns or staff in your office, share the results and success of the project they helped you with. And that'll kind of show them how vital their help was, and they'll be more likely to help you again. Some more of the life hacks I've learned from podcasts, including going into low power mode. And I like this one also. So if you've ever felt like one major project or something was taking all of your time and you just really didn't have much time or attention to be doing anything else, you can say, I'm going into low power mode. And that means you're still at work, you're checking emails, you're kind of staying afloat, but nothing new is coming out of your office until whatever project or something you're doing is complete. So I think it's really important to write things down that are running through your head. I don't know about you, but I have a really hard time functioning or focusing on anything when I have a running to-do list in my brain. Do a brain dump, get it all out on paper to clear your head. Make sure you don't forget something that needs to be done later on. This could be before you start a project, or if you're just thinking of things and you can't seem to concentrate on other things. I do this a lot by sending myself an email if something pops in my head and I know I just can't stop thinking about it until I write it down somewhere. I'll stop what I'm doing, send myself an email. I know I've taken care of that idea or whatever it is. And later on, when I'm somewhere, I can pull that idea out of my email and move it where it needs to go.
And
Yes.
real quick, a couple of comments. Luke in the chat box says that the diffusion of responsibility, he definitely experiences that.
Yes.
And then Donna just had a general question. How do you do this if you don't keep paper? But it sounds like you keep paper for some of the to-do list or just to get the idea out.
As far as getting to-do items out of my head, you mean?
Yes, because you've mostly gone paperless, right?
Yeah, I have my planner. So what I'll do, truthfully, most of the time when I'm sending myself emails is when I'm running, and I tend to have time to be in my head, and I can't continue to move on if I'm thinking, okay, I've got to remember this for later. I've got to remember this for later. Instead, I'm just going to stop what I'm doing, open my email, send myself an email from my phone. It's going into my email, and then when I get home or wherever, I can open up my planner and say, okay, I ever need to remember to do this on, you know, I'll add it to a to-do list or a time block or a schedule or wherever it needs to go. Hopefully that answered the question. This is another great quote. If you can't get out of it, get into it. So reports, other annoyances, part of life. But if you learn to accept the things you can't change, like traffic and reports, you may find yourself happier and healthier. What about difficult tasks? I think it's a great idea to follow a ritual of completion. So think again about that annual report I just mentioned. How can you congratulate yourself and others that helped you with that on a great job done? Could be anything. Ice cream party, lunch out, day off, depends on how big or small the project was. And you can certainly follow a ritual of completion for any type of task that you're working on. Take a real break. If your brain needs a break, give it a real break. Take a walk, go outside for a set amount of time. So you can set a timer for 10, 20 minutes and go outside or do something away from a screen instead of the mindless scrolling on the internet for you know, an unknown amount of time. Time seems to pass very quickly when you say, I'm going to look away from this, you know, fact sheet I'm writing just for a few minutes to scroll Facebook, and then 30 minutes later, your brain is kind of confused and where did time go and that sort of thing. So your brain knows the difference. If you can get away from what you're doing, get outside and take a real break. And I kind of mentioned this before, but I don't know about you. When I have time to clear my mind, that's when the great ideas, or great ideas to me, I guess, come to me. So when you're running, walking, hiking, maybe when you're taking that break, you'll have some good ideas come to you. And if you really need motivation to complete a task you're dreading, you can set a timer and you can try a power hour. You can do a 1-minute timer, a 15-minute timer to get a job done. Kind of depends. You can bundle small jobs together and say, I've got 10 minutes. I'm going to file everything and, you know, go through this stack of paper over here, and it's going to be done in 10 minutes. Gretchen Rubin has a great quote about that as well, because things that can be done at any time are often done at no time. You can also create a master list for your year. I did 19 for 2019. This list would include all things you'd like to accomplish in a year. It's not all work related. Most of it's personal, actually. They don't have to be lofty plans or huge ideas. They could just be small things that you want to make sure you have a year to get done. It's a great exercise you could do with your family, with your coworkers. I had my kids do a list of 9 things for 2019. Theirs were things like ride a bike, learn scooter tricks. I mean, yours could be very similar, I suppose, as well. But if you create a yearly plan and at the end of the prior year, you can kind of help set your calendar up to make some of these things happen. So if you have some special trip you want to do for the next year, maybe you'll really make it a priority to schedule that into your calendar. And then finally, I found that while we worry about being the first person to write that fact sheet or worry about our presentations being not good enough to share with other extension agents, that really our extension family is there to support us and cheer us on, and suggest making the time to break out of your usual group at meetings and conferences to meet new people. If you're presenting somewhere, maybe let a fellow presenter know that you're nervous about the presentation as well, and support your fellow agents that are working to change the lives of the residents in the state you live in. And this is kind of where the quote that Nicole mentioned came in, where the quote is, "Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good." And it's just kind of a reminder to accept our good work and share it instead of striving for perfection that's really nearly impossible anyway. So I could keep adding to this PowerPoint until it's completely perfect, or I could share the ideas that I have now and get some good ideas from other people and, build from there. So here are some of the podcasts that I listen to. I find Before Breakfast with Laura Vanderkam is very short. I found another one this week called the Productivity Podcast that I found really helpful. The Running Lifestyle Show is not all about running. They've actually changed the title of it. I'd have to find what it's called now. But there are some good ideas. So scroll through, maybe pick a few podcasts. I mean, you can go into the app and search for things as well. Anybody have any great podcasts that weren't mentioned earlier? We can add those to the list if you just type them in, and we can compile those at the end of the webinar. So anybody have any additional life hacks, other useful tips you learned while listening to a podcast? If you have anything else that I didn't mention that would be great to share with other people, you can type them into the chat box or unmute your phone. I love getting ideas from people. I seem to always want to try something new out.
Luke Gustafson said to everyone in the chat box, 99% invisible. Luke, is that a podcast? Okay, he says yes.
Great, I'll write that one down.
Yeah, that's one we'll need to check out. And then we have a question about any good horticulture related podcasts that anyone listens to. And Kay Dunker, I'm not sure your first name and where you're from, but if anyone has ideas, they're looking for horticulture related podcasts and they're actually thinking of starting a podcast. Katie Dunker in Colorado, thank you.
I actually had someone in my office recommend one to me. Truthfully, I don't listen to any gardening related ones, but there's one called Garden Nerd Tip of the Week that someone recommended to me. I'm not sure. I haven't researched many of the gardening ones. They might be really regionally specific, but that would be pretty fun to start one.
And Kara has asked favorite apps or podcasts to assist our work or unique workflow. I like the one that Anne mentioned before breakfast. That one, I think they're usually like 5 minutes or less. They're really quick. And sometimes there are things that you think, man, why didn't I think about this before? But they're packaged really well. And so oftentimes I'll just listen to that on my way into the office, and it's like a little tip for the day.
Yeah, I agree. That's a short one. And most of those are, little things you can add in pretty easily. I think the main thing is to pull a bunch of things together and try them out and see what works for you. I mean, clearly the people that use a paper planner and nothing online will find something works very differently from them than people that only use an online calendar. I just
Right.
whatever works for you is best.
I listened to the Lord Vanderkam podcast, and I've read a couple of her books. And one of the things she recommends is if you want to learn sort of how you're spending your time, is to track your time. So I was kind of beating myself up thinking I'm not spending enough time with the volunteers. And then I tracked my time, and I realized from that exercise, on average, I tracked my time for 3 weeks. I actually talked to one-on-one 4 to 8 master gardeners on average per day. So here I was thinking in my head, I'm not building enough relationships. And then after I saw that, I thought, that's good. I can go with that. So that was something that helped me from her podcast. And John has a question. He'd like for you to tell us more about using the paper planner with the online calendar. Do you use the paper because it's easier to add notes to, or just a personal preference? And I do want to let everybody know that that's one of the things I've admired about you, is that you've somehow been able to make the break and extension from not using paper so much. Like, we hoard paper and we keep it for years, but somehow, Anne, you figured that out. So that could probably be a whole nother webinar on how to go paperless.
Maybe I'm just like tossing it all or refusing it, and I'm missing out on something, but I haven't figured out what that is yet. The way that I use the online and print. A couple things. So no one sees my paper planner. So, for example, my husband doesn't see the paper planner, and other people in my office. So it's kind of just things that I need to make sure that I do myself. So, for example, if I had a kid that had a sporting event and I just wanted to know about it, but my husband's taking them, I may or may not put it on my paper planner. Same thing about, work-related items. If maybe they're on our online calendar, we have a plant sale coming up, but for some reason I'm not going, I wouldn't put it in my paper planner, but I have it on an online calendar. Also, for the online calendar, I can plan way out in advance. I don't typically transfer things into my paper planner until the week before for my weekly planner. And then usually I'm only maybe 1 or 2 months out on the monthly views. So if you were to flip to my December paper planner, I only have a couple things on there that I know aren't changing. So I don't have to do a lot of erasing and things. I make those changes on the online calendar, and then I'll move them into paper. So also on the paper planner, I don't keep any pads of paper or extra to-do lists or anything. Anything I have to do, I write it down in one place. I think that's from if anybody did any of the Franklin Covey stuff years ago, I think that was one of their things, was to keep everything in one place. So I don't have Post-it notes. I don't have paper pads. If it's something that I've got to do for the week, I put it in kind of a log on the side, and daily things I track that way as well. So hopefully that makes sense.
We have a couple other comments in the chat box. Eva has said that she doesn't do podcasts, but she's done life mastering and other online certificate programs, so she'll look into the podcast. John said, thank you, that helps. And Marissa says that in UC, University of California, I believe, not a podcast, but the Master Gardeners in Orange County have a radio show that they do, and then they post the archives on the website. So that's another way to kind of use that as a tool to get your extension message out.
Cool.
Does anyone else have any other tips or suggestions or questions for Anne? I know you mentioned, Anne, when you need to focus, you said try a power hour, set a timer. And this is something else that I think can be helpful, because we might overestimate how much time we think it takes to accomplish a task, especially if we don't want to get started on it. So I'll just use a really simple example, unloading the dishwasher. In our mind, if that's not something we want to do, we might think it's like going to take a long time, when really it might take, 2 minutes at the most. Mm-hmm. So being, getting a realistic picture of setting that timer and actually knowing how much time something might take that we procrastinate can actually help us to do that again the next time and not worry about that as much. So that's something that's a tip for me. And then I also use the Pomodoro technique. Are you all familiar with the Pomodoro technique? So the Pomodoro technique is when you set a timer. You can use an online app. I just have an extension on my computer screen. And if I have a task that I really don't want to do, and typically it's administrative, like travel documents or something like that, I'll set that timer, and then it helps me work for like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or 20 minutes, and then it lets you take a break, and it's a quick break. Then you go back and finish it. And so you keep working until you finish it. But the point is that it gives you that little break. It gets you motivated, gets you started. And I really just use that for things that are like drudge work that I really don't want to do. So that's another little extension that you can put on your computer.
You could also give yourself a ritual of completion when that's done. If I'm going to spend, 30 minutes doing this, afterwards, I can go take a walk outside, or I don't know, look at Facebook or whatever it is, but I can't do it until, and that's your little treat, I guess, at the end. Mm-hmm. I've also heard that if you can do something in under 1 minute, like hang up a bag or hang up a coat or something like that, instead of throwing it down, that you should always try and immediately do those things as well if they're under a minute.
And our state master gardener coordinator here in Florida, she let me know about an extension that you can get on Chrome. If you use Google Chrome like every day to log in, and it's called Momentum. I don't know if any of you use Momentum, but they give you a really beautiful picture each day when you log into your computer. It says, welcome Nicole, or welcome John, or welcome Pat, whatever your name is. And then it asks you what your main thing is to do that day. You can also create an electronic list next to it that you can check off throughout the day. But for me, having that one thing to focus on, and sometimes it's not even work related. It might be that I need to spend some time with my family that evening, or I have another volunteer commitment after work that I need to do, or it is work. Just reminding me what's that number one priority through the day. That can be very helpful. Okay, are there any other tips, tricks, or life hacks? John says Google Keep is a nice app. John, I'm not familiar with that one. Can you explain either?
Hi, Nicole.
Hey.
Yeah, it's like electronic board on your computer, screen on your computer. It's part of the Google suite, and it's like a bunch of sticky notes. And you can change the colors and the titles of the sticky notes, and add new ones. And you can get the app on your phone and also on other other devices. And yeah, it's great for to-do lists and notes and that sort of thing. So I have used that in the past. Although I'm going to try out Evernote here a little bit. Hearing about that today, but yeah. That's a good one.
Thank you. That's a great suggestion. And Luke says that he used Google Keep too, and he puts that on the Android phone for to-do lists and other notes. I've put the link in there for the Pomodoro tracker that I use on my computer. That helps me. I think I even have like oil change on here, so I can make sure to do that for my car, which I sometimes forget. And I think in general, as extension agents, a lot of times we're so work-focused and we're people-focused as volunteer coordinators. But remember, like, your day and your week and your year encompass a lot of things outside of work. So thinking about how you spend your time in terms of a full day or a week, or even looking at your calendar from a year. If you have that perspective, you can also often see that you're doing a lot. And then think about, if you have something on one day that involves a lot of effort or interacting with people, if that's something that you need the next day to kind of take a break from and maybe work on a solitary project or something, know what works for you and then plan your schedule as best you can to work for you instead of being back to back and reactive.
Yeah, I agree. It really is helpful to look at least have a glance at your week and sometimes your month ahead, just to be able to look at that and visually figure out what you need as far as, do you like the back-to-back meetings so they're done, or do you need a break, or those types of things.
Okay. Well, Anne, I really appreciate you sharing your tips and your life hacks with us. I also appreciate you reminding us that our day encompasses work, but also time for ourselves and relationships with other people and our families. You've given us some ideas, as well as the other folks on the podcast or on the webinar for podcasts that we can listen to, and some other hacks that we can try. And so if anyone has any other comments, feel free to put them in the chat box. I'm going to go ahead and in the webinar, and then if you'd like to stay on, I have a discussion question that we can talk about as a group. It probably won't take longer than 5 to 10 minutes. So thank you so much, Anne, for talking with us today and sharing your tips with us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. I hope everybody found it mildly helpful.
All right. So if you all could hang on for a moment, I'm going to stop the recording, and then we'll go ahead and have our discussion.